Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most chaotic, fiercely disputed, and frankly controversial elections in American history. We're going to unpack the life and legacy of our 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes. And we'll look at exactly how a guy known for his absolute, strict moral code somehow ended up right at the center of the ultimate political backroom deal. Let's get right into it. Okay. Let's kick things off by looking at this incredibly razor-thin margin, 185 to 184. That is the Electoral College vote that eventually put Hayes in the White House. Literally just one single electoral vote. It perfectly captures the intense political drama and really the absolute uncertainty of the era we're about to explore. Section 1. A fiercely disputed election. So, to understand how we even got to that crazy one-vote margin, we have to step back into the sheer chaos of 1876. Hayes was the Republican candidate, running against the Democrat Samuel Tilden of New York. And here's the wild twist. Tilden actually won the popular vote. But as we know, that simply wasn't enough to secure the presidency. There were heavily disputed results in 4 specific states: Louisiana, South Carolina, Florida, and Oregon. Because of these disputes, neither guy had a clear electoral college majority. Instead, you had conflicting groups of electors from these states sending competing votes to Congress. It was absolute confusion. It effectively stalled the transfer of power and sent the whole shebang straight to Capitol Hill.
After months of just high-stakes, nail-biting uncertainty, Congress finally decided to set up a special electoral commission in January 1877 to settle the dispute once and for all. It was made up of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. And well, you can probably guess what happened. This specially established commission ultimately decided every single disputed contest in favor of Hayes, voting strictly 100% along party lines, 8-7.
Section 2. The President of Integrity. Now, you might be wondering, how does a leader famous for his unshakable moral compass become the winner of such a highly partisan, controversial compromise? Let's flash back a bit to see exactly why Republican delegates held him in such incredibly high regard long before the 1876 election. His path was really rooted in service and steady achievement. Born in Ohio in 1822, he was super well educated, going to Kenyon College and then Harvard Law School. After practicing law for a bit, he moved to Cincinnati, where he rapidly flourished as a young Whig lawyer. He married Lucy Webb in 1852, entered Congress in late 1865, and between 1867 and 1876, he served an impressive 3 terms as Ohio's governor. But the moments that really defined his character happened during the Civil War. Hayes fought bravely, got wounded multiple times, and ultimately rose to the rank of brevet major general. Now get this, while he was still serving in the Army, Cincinnati Republicans nominated him for the House of Representatives. He accepted, but absolutely refused to campaign. He famously wrote that an officer fit for duty who at this crisis would abandon his post for election year ought to be scalped. I mean, wow. His dedication was just undeniable, and he was elected by a huge majority without ever leaving his post. By the time 1876 rolled around, Hayes was a top-tier presidential candidate precisely because of this branding. He was universally known for dignity, honesty, party loyalty, and moderate reform. And he brought this strict moral code right into his family life, and eventually the executive mansion. He and Lucy had 8 kids, and once they were in the White House, much to the absolute delight of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, Lucy actually carried out her husband's orders to banish all wines and liquors from the premises. Section 3. Compromise and Consequences. Now, to understand the immediate aftermath, we have to pull back the curtain on what it actually cost behind closed doors to get this man of integrity into the presidency. To secure that final 185 to 184 electoral victory for Hayes, Northern Republicans had to make some massive concessions to Southern Democrats. Yes, the Republicans secured the White House, but in exchange, Southern Democrats were promised at least 1 cabinet post, federal patronage, subsidies for internal improvements, and, without a doubt the most consequential part, the complete withdrawal of federal troops from Louisiana and South Carolina. Once he was in office, Hayes insisted his cabinet appointments be based strictly on merit, rather than just purely political considerations. He chose some very high-caliber, moderate politicians. But following through on the spirit of that compromise actually outraged folks within his own Republican Party. Why? Because to build that merit-based cabinet, he ended up including an ex-Confederate, as well as another member who had bolted the party as a liberal Republican back in 1872. And honestly, this just brilliantly highlights the tragic irony of the Hayes administration. On the one hand, Hayes personally supported African Americans' right to vote. He absolutely insisted that Southern Democrats recognize and uphold civil rights. But on the other hand, just as the compromise dictated, those federal troops were removed from the South. The harsh, undeniable reality was that the second those troops left Louisiana and South Carolina, Republican political resistance basically crumbled overnight. The devastating fallout of removing those troops really cannot be overstated. Without federal protection, Southern Democrats quickly swept back in and reclaimed political power across the South. They systematically disenfranchised Black voters. We're talking literacy tests, poll taxes, and just widespread coercion and violence used to oppress African Americans. So the essential takeaway here is that the compromise that elected a moderate reformer ultimately abandoned millions of people to decades of systemic abuse. Section 4. A one-term legacy. When looking at the lasting political impact of his administration, it's pretty fascinating that a lot of leaders in the New South actually approved of Hayes's financial conservatism. They highly favored Republican economic policies. But the political divide was just way too entrenched. For a Southern politician back then, joining the Republican Party, which everyone saw as the party of Reconstruction, meant absolute annihilation at the polls. So, despite persistent efforts by Hayes and his Republican successors, they simply couldn't win over what became known as the Solid South. Now, staying totally true to his reputation for honesty, Hayes had announced well in advance that he intended to serve only a single term in office. And he actually kept that promise. He assumed the presidency in 1877, and by 1881, he willingly stepped down. He left the political battlefield of Washington behind and retired to his home, Spiegel Grove, out in Fremont, Ohio. But retirement didn't mean he retreated from public life, not at all. His later years were packed with continued activism. He stayed deeply committed to social reform, championing big causes like universal education, improving prison conditions across the whole country, and helping military veterans get their pensions. He poured himself into this work right up until his death on January 17, 1893. Which leaves us with this final, honestly incredibly difficult question. How do we weigh a legacy of unquestionable personal integrity against the devastating political compromises of 1877? Rutherford B. Hayes was a brave war hero, a devoted family man, and a moderate reformer who despised corruption. Yet, his path to the presidency required a bargain that reversed the gains of Reconstruction and paved the way for the systematic oppression of African Americans in the South. It's a really powerful reminder that, when we look at history, personal morality and political consequences don't always align. Think about that as you reflect on the election of 1876.